To 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop their...
So, Simon, welcome to the show. I've got Simon De La Rue here with me, who's set himself a somewhat mammoth task, I must say. He's a reporter for the Guernsey Press, and I'm seriously impressed when he told me about what he was getting up to in the run-up to Liberation. Do you want to tell us what you were doing?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, first of all, Nick. Yeah, I it's not a task I set myself. I was set it by my boss.
But you didn't turn up to a meeting, did you? You were the one person not there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When they went, who's going to do this?
Well, I had an inkling that I might be invited to get involved in our Liberation Day coverage this year, because obviously it's a really big anniversary. And with my enthusiasm for local history, being a Visit Guernsey accredited tour guide in my spare time, it was not surprising that I was invited to be involved. But I was slightly surprised by the scope of the program that we put ourselves to, which is basically an 80-day countdown to the 80th anniversary. So we began 80 days out, which was February the 18th, which by coincidence was my birthday. And we launched it then. And we, in each edition, until and including the 9th of May, the 80th anniversary, we are putting out an article about Liberation Day. Now, not all of these are focusing on the day itself in 1945. Some are through personal testimonies or diaries or memoirs, but also we are putting out other articles which are looking ahead to this year's celebration. And so we're interviewing lots of people, and there are so many people who are working towards this year's commemorations and celebrations, be they volunteers, charity organisations, reenactors, people putting up a 1.5 kilometres of bunting, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people are getting hands-on and actually doing things. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. I've had a few people that have contacted me through the blog website to ask about what's going on, or just simply to tell me that they're actually coming over and that they've got some connection to Liberation Day itself. So there are two gentlemen who are coming from Wales who are the sons of a gentleman who was in Force 135. They were actually in Guernsey for the first time in a very long time last year. So I met up with them last year, but they weren't sure if they were going to be able to come this year. But they emailed me the other day to say that they are. So you've got great things like that happening. All the people, as you say, who volunteered, things like your project. I mean, I'm loving it so far. I've been reading your articles, and I just think they're brilliant. And I mean,
it is sort of snowballing a little bit, it has to be said, because we launched with this fascinating conversation that I had with a woman who lives in the same parish as me in the Catel by the name of Margaret Lecoq, who was able to identify herself in a photograph that was taken on Liberation Day in 1945. And about which there was an appeal 20 years ago on the 60th anniversary. Do you know the girl in this photo? And she went to the trouble of actually cutting it out of the relevant magazine, but then never told anyone until she told me a couple of weeks ago at the end of the interview that I did with her and said, would this interest you? And I said, yes, that would interest me. So, I included that, and we made that the opening sort of salvo, if you like, the opening article of our big 80-day campaign. And lo and behold, that very morning, I get a call from Jersey from an expert in photography of the war period who is able to name the photographer and offer me a load of other photographs he took that day. And also, I get a phone call, or a Facebook message actually gets put up on the post that we put on socials from somebody saying, oh, that's my granddad in the front there. So, of course, I contacted her as well. And it turns out that he was somebody who kept a diary throughout the war that's never been published. So they've enabled me to have a look at that as well. So not every article is going to have quite that kind of response, but nevertheless, it made me realize that there's a lot of stories out there that haven't yet been told.
It's amazing, isn't it? We've had the same thing where for the podcast or for the blog, you get an email out of the blue or a message on Facebook or something like that, and it just says, "Oh, you're probably not interested in this," but
Yeah.
and of course you're interested. People just think, "Oh, well, that wasn't really that interesting. What my granddad did, or what I remember seeing when I was 7 or 8 years old," that sort of thing. And these things are fascinating, and sadly, these stories will be lost if people weren't doing a project like the one that you're doing now. As I say, the photographer, was that the doctor that took the photographs, or?
It was a member of
Yeah,
the US Signals Corps by the name of George Holt.
Okay. Because
You can read more about him in an upcoming
yes,
edition.
in an upcoming, we're not gonna spoil anything, but I know you told me about the unpublished diary, and that's just a fantastic story as well. So people really do need to buy the Guernsey Press and read your stories. I know there is some moving footage which is on the Imperial War Museum website, recorded by a doctor who'd pre-war been a keen cinematographer, and he'd hidden the film and the camera under some floorboards for the entire occupation and pulled it out on Liberation Day. Frankly, I'm
Wow.
amazed that, with the quality of film in those days, I'm amazed it still worked, but it clearly did.
There is presumably some other film as well, because in that very photograph with which we launched, in the background, you're able to see 2 US military personnel on board a Jeep with operating a moving camera. Whether that footage still exists is open to question, but I haven't seen it yet. Tantalizing though. I should say as well, actually, Nick, that as well as running all of these articles day by day, when we get much closer to the day itself, for those people who haven't been able to catch every edition during the whole sequence, we are going to have a sort of highlights supplement. So there'll be a souvenir supplement on the 8th of May, just before the liberation. So that's something to look out for.
That is a brilliant idea, to remember the 80th anniversary and some of those fantastic stories that you've uncovered. And no doubt by the time we actually get to liberation, you'll probably have uncovered a few more stories, as people get to realise that you're keen to hear from them.
Yeah, we're getting new things sort of being sent my way all the time. So it's exciting, and also a huge amount of work to get through. But it's
yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the benefits, obviously, of the internet, is you get people contact you from all around the world. I've got people that clearly read the Guernsey Press in the US, people that have a connection to Guernsey, or they've been reading the Jersey Evening Post or something like that, and they've seen something in there, and then they've been Googling, found my website, and then asked me if I know anything about it, because great uncle so and so was in Force 135, or was a German officer here. I've had a gentleman get in touch with me not so long ago who's trying to work out exactly where his relative was based here. It was a slightly odd email exchange. He was a little bit coy to start off with. I think he was wondering quite how I'd react, because he sent an email saying, "I don't know if you'd be able to help me, but I wonder if you could." A relative of mine was in the Channel Islands during the occupation. He was in the forces, so I pretty much worked out that meant he was a German. So I emailed him back and said, "Yeah, I'd love to help you if I can, but could you give me a little bit more detail?" And then he came back and said, "Oh, okay, no, glad you're willing to help," or whatever, and gave me a wee bit more detail about his great uncle, I think it was, who was in the Luftwaffe.
Well, it's something I've been conscious of as well, wanting to tell as many different perspectives of this event as I can. So I've just been I'm at my desk now at work. I've just been looking at the diary of Hans Max von Aufsess, which of course was published by Blue Orma. I know you spoke about it recently on your special edition with Steve Foote. And in addition, of course, there are those who our sequence of articles are really being hung on the peg of Liberation Day itself. We're really focusing all our attention on that. But of course, there are people who missed out on that occasion, either because they were evacuated, or they didn't see out the occupation on the island because they were deported, or indeed there are those who were away serving with the armed forces. So, there are ways of bringing them in. So there are people who were evacuated who have recollections of what the response was amongst them and their families on hearing that the island was liberated, and suddenly being able to communicate with them again, which was an enormous relief to them, of course. And then there's also the liberation of Biberach itself, which of course is 23rd of April. So that's something we're going to be looking at through this sequence. Once we get up to that particular date, we'll sort of pause the 9th of May stuff and turn our attention to the 23rd of April for those few days. And so, yeah, there's lots of different aspects to try to weave into this whole tale.
Yeah, there was a gentleman who came over last year, actually, who'd written a book about Biberach camp. He came over, he lives in Biberach, and he came over. There was a reception for him at the Royal Court because he wrote a story about escape from there before it was used as civilian internment. A chap called Stefan. I'm trying to think what his surname is off the top of my head, but we exchange emails occasionally.
Okay. So
yeah, there are so many different stories that. Yeah, and as you say, there were the people that were evacuated as well. You know, what things were like, you know, living away from home, effectively being sort of fostered to a certain extent, or if they were lucky, staying with a big school.
And the difference between the two experiences was enormous between being here and being evacuated, and yet the reasoning behind going or staying was so often so flimsy. I mean, I've just today, which will for a story that would be published at the weekend or Monday, I can't remember, losing track, but which will be published soon, is of a little girl who, she was an only child. She was taken to the Cattell school in order to be evacuated, and they were told that the boat for that day had been cancelled. Come back again at 5 o'clock the next morning. And her father said, well, I'm not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm not getting up early enough to get you up there for that time. Yeah, you'll stay with us. And she stayed in Guernsey for the duration of the occupation on the basis that her dad took umbrage at being asked to get up at that hour of the morning.
Yeah, that sounds like a very similar story to Melva Stacey, who I interviewed last year, who they quite possibly the same day they went and were up to Vale School and were told, no, sorry, the boat's now not going, you know, you'll have to go home. Went home, and her parents overnight just went, well, you know what, we don't fancy going now. So they decided to stay. So yeah, very similar sort of story. And I think
I'll throw in another example. Jeanette Ferguson, 5 years old. She's on the gangplank with her two sisters, Nina and Velma. And then it's getting dark, it's getting cold. She starts crying, has by all accounts a bit of a tantrum. And the teacher asks a favour of a couple of St John ambulancemen to take her home. So she stays in Guernsey for the occupation with her eldest sister and parents, and the two older sisters go off and spend 5 years in England. It beggars belief, really. It brings it home. I think it's one of the most powerful things for bringing home the mixture of extraordinary consequence and trivial day-to-day existence in a way that kind of brings the whole war experience into sharp relief.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as well, I've spoken to people that decided not to go, and then the boats that were paid for free evacuation stopped, and then they thought about paying for themselves to go on the mail boat, and then after a couple of days thought, actually, nothing's really happening. It's going to be fine. We're just going to stay. And then, of course, the air raid happened, and the whole situation completely changed. And the people's views on whether it was a good thing to go or whether it was a bad thing to go from the point of view of the island is also just fascinating. Just the different takes on it that people have. You know, were you being yellow by going, or were you doing the sensible thing? So yeah, I just find it the whole thing absolutely fascinating. And the more people that you speak to, you find that they're, you know, a member of their family, or if you're lucky enough, somebody that's still alive that lived through it, you know, had a completely different take on some situation to other people that you've spoken to or books that you've read and things like that. I just find it. So it must be a great process for you, and albeit crammed into 80 days.
Yeah. In theory, I'm part-time here at the press as well. But actually, there's one little, you say, a great experience for me. One of the interviewees is my own father, who I had spoken to about the liberation, but many, many years ago. And he is old enough to recall it, even though he was only 4 years old the time that it happened. And he's given me his account in great detail. And one of the things that's come about actually through your friend of mine, Steve Foote, again, is the company Find My Past, who have been very busy scanning all the documents in Guernsey and are going to be launching later this year their wide array of documents that you're able to scan through their services, or you're able to search through their services, have agreed to allow me to be a sort of guinea pig for their work and to demonstrate what they can do, what sort of information they can find. So I'm looking forward to finding out a little bit more about, mine and my dad's ancestors and families and how they're affected. And that will include his maternal grandfather, who you featured on your November 1941 episode, Ernest Albert Bruard, who was shot in his kitchen by a German cleaning his pistol. And his name, I can't remember the name. I've got it written down somewhere. I think it's Philip Kuhn. That's all I know about
that. That rings a bell, actually. Yeah, I'm sure that's what his name was.
Kuhn. But I don't know anything about him, and I've always wondered. What happened to him? Where did he go? Did he get sent to the Eastern Front? Did he see out his post-war time in Featherstone or some other POW camp? It'd be fascinating to find out. So I'm looking forward to that part of it as well.
Yeah, and it gives you a legitimate reason to quiz your father on it as well, because I know often people were reluctant to talk to their relatives about the experience, and that certainly I've done some interviews, and then the son or daughter of said person that I've interviewed has said, well, they never told me half of that stuff. But because it's somebody that's slightly detached, but also you've got a reason for asking the questions, because you're going to write an article. So perhaps you might find out some things that you simply didn't know about.
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely an education for me. So yeah, I've learned things through your podcast series. I've learned things through this process, and I've been a tour guide now for well over 10 years, and I spent a lot of time researching the occupation. Although not exclusively that, obviously, it's just one period in our history. But there's always so much more to learn.
Yeah, and you just find I was at the Prio Library at the weekend, and the whole day just disappeared, basically. I suddenly realised I had 10 minutes before they were closing. But you start looking at stuff, and I found a couple of notices, which in their own right, these notices in wartime copies of the Guernsey Press, you probably read them and go, but actually they're connected to a much bigger story, and it's like, okay, that makes sense now. That's why this happened, and it sort of joins up the dots. It's like the missing jigsaw piece or something like that. Well, Simon, thank you very much for your time this evening to have a chat about it. Good luck with your project. People can read the Guernsey Press online. You can subscribe if you want to have a read of some of Simon's articles and all the other articles in the Guernsey Press. I've been very much enjoying them. I look forward, having had a few teasers of things that might be coming up. I'm really looking forward to reading them. So good luck, and no doubt we'll speak before May.
Yeah, if anybody has anything that it's specific they need to contact me about with regard to this, it's sdelarue@guernseypress.com.
Brilliant, Simon. I'll put that in the show notes as well, and out on our social media as well, so that people know how to get hold of you. Thanks very much.
Yes.
Cheers.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes, and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and family had gone.